Well, welcome back to Keys of the Kingdom. So we were talking about money, and where did it come from? What is it not? What should it be? And what is the real value that we're dealing with when we talk about things like money? I mean, where did even the word money come from? It actually comes from a temple of Moneta, which is actually the temple of Juno Moneta, which is two different gods given the same coin. Now, which is like, how's that going to work? You got two different gods that have the same coin. And why do that? What is the metaphor of that idea? But anyway, we'll talk about that later. We were talking about Rome and the Roman Empire, and these are two different things. We talk about Rome, but for the first 500 years, Rome was a republic. Before Rome was a republic, Israel was a republic. I mean, you can look that up in encyclopedias. It says that Israel was the first republic. I mean, even before some of the Greek city-states, Israel was a republic. Well, it really wasn't the first republic, but in recorded history, it was one of the earliest forms of a republic. No king, no president. The high priest, which was equivalent to their senate, could not pass no laws. They couldn't muster an army. They couldn't draft the people. They couldn't take from the people. Now, they could receive from the people, but they couldn't take from the people. I had somebody telling me the other day, one of these ignorant pastors telling me that, oh, no, they had to tithe. I said, so what was the punishment for not tithing? Did you go to jail? Well, did you have your goods confiscated? Well, no, God said you had to tithe. Yeah, but men didn't say you had to tithe. There was no enforcement. Even the Ten Commandments, they don't have any enforcement. You don't go to jail because you didn't honor your father and your mother. You don't get penalized. Your days won't be long upon the land, but they're just telling you, if you don't do these things, bad things will happen. If you live by the sword, you will be under the sword. If you bite one another, you will be devoured. They're telling you principles of a cause and effect universe. They're not imposing fines and legal limitations upon you, because God is the God of heaven. He's the God of creation. His fines, his penalties are built into creation itself. And he's telling you how to be free souls under his authority rather than go under the authority of Cain, Nimrod, Pharaoh, Caesar, and anybody else you want to elect as a ruler over you. So in a republic, there is no such ruler. That the power of the state in a pure republic is in the hands of the individual, and therefore the individual family. The family was created by God and by the nature of God. You know, one man, one woman, children, that's a family. And those children grow up, they have children until the grandfather dies, that's one family, because he's still there. And so that's a unit. That's a natural corporation under the pre-existing authority of the God of nature, the God of creation. But that family can take some of its rights and contract them away into other groups. He can elect a king. He can elect a ruler. He can elect a senate. He can give that senate power to make laws. In the original Roman Republic, the Senate had no power to make laws. There was no king. There was no even proconsul. So, where was the power? The power was in the hands of the individual, and the individual, was the state. It was literally the early Roman Republic. They were all statists. But the state rested in the hands of every individual. That's a pure republic. Now, when you create a constitutional republic, where you take some of the power that's in the hands of the individual and you put it into the hands of a Congress or a Senate or a president, then that constitutional republic is no longer a pure republic. It's a constitutional republic. And some of the power rests in the hands of these other entities, these corporate entities, and they're incorporated by the people who create such corporations. So who created the corporation of the United States federal government? You know, that's an important question. I have to adjust my microphone here. And I'm having trouble doing it. Just a second here. Who incorporated the United States? Was it the people of America? No, they didn't incorporate the government of the United States. Those guys who signed the Constitution, they began the process of incorporation with their signature, but they could only sign for themselves. They couldn't even sign for the individual states. They weren't delegated the power to create a new government. They were just supposed to be a fact-finding group to find out what we could do to improve the Articles of Confederation. That's just basic history that most people don't know. So, who incorporated the United States? Well, it was all the senators that were elected and the congressmen that were elected. When they signed on, the individual states signed on and sent their delegates, they were creating a corporation under the authority of the states. So the United States was a corporation under the authority of the individual state governments, which most of the individual state governments were republics. So, do we see a problem here? Is that what we have today? No, in reality, that's not what we have today, because the United States is now a separate corporation, and this all took place during our Civil War, where the federal governments are now dictating to the states. And how can they dictate to the states? Because of revenue sharing. You don't get any federal revenue. And because the citizens of the states are not citizens of the states, they're citizens of the United States, and they're residents of the individual states. They used to be citizens of the individual states. Now they're citizens of the United States and residents of their individual states. Now that may be getting too complicated for a lot of you to follow, but the point is there was vast changes in the American Republic to the point where now the American Republic is virtually, because of the abandonment of the people, has become an indirect democracy. And it's becoming an indirect social democracy, quickly, has been since about 1910. And you can see, if you actually study the law and the history of the law, you can actually see how the nature of the courts was changing around 1911, 1910. The relationship of the citizens to the United States was changing around 1933. Our money began to change back in 1916. At least what we were using as money, the introduction of national legal tender, I should say federal legal tender, because that wasn't really national anymore, it was federal, from the Federal Reserve, which wasn't really national. But anyway, all these things are taking place, and it's morphing the structure of government, the structure of the economy, and therefore the structure of society itself. So if we go back to Rome and take a look at what was going on in Rome, and the reason I started talking about all this is because of the fact that I was going to try to answer something I've said many times before, is that Caesar loaned money into circulation. And now Caesar wasn't the beginning of coinage in Rome. There was no Caesar when Rome began to coin money. And this is what I was saying at the end of the last program, is that they were coining money in commemoration of events. And you would see some sort of symbol on the coin that related to a particular success, some sort of political or military success. And there were other coins that were issued, and they don't always know why, but they would have pictures of different gods and stuff like that. But we don't know what they were doing in the temples. This is one of the big problems, and we're going to explore that to understand. The Temple of Saturn is where they kept birth certificates. Birth certificates, you say? Why the Temple of Saturn? What were they doing in the Temple of Moneta? Juno Moneta. The full name is Juno Moneta. Well, they were minting coins. Well, what else did they do in there that was not just minting coins? All the records of the magistrates, the decisions of judges. And by the way, the word judges there would be the word for gods, magistrates. The records, their decisions were kept in the Temple of Moneta. So why is in the mint, are they keeping the judicial records of magistrates? What's going on? What's happening there? How about the Temple of Janus? What were they doing in the Temple of Janus? This is that two-faced God, where you have the head on one side, face on one side, and the face on the other side, almost like something out of Riddick. What was going on in that temple? Well, did you know that there wasn't a temple at the Temple of Janus? It was actually a walled-in area with two gates. There was an in gate and an out gate. And that was it. That was all that was there. Why is that? Well, did you know that the word temple originally didn't refer to a building? The word temple referred to an area. And in that area there might be an altar. So what were they doing in these places? They would go there and they would do stuff. Where's the record? What's happening in these places? Now, obviously, when you had the Temple of Saturn and they're storing stuff in that, they had a building. And what were they storing in that? Birth certificates. If you came from another country and you were an ambassador, they would put your ambassador records there that would be that you're in this country based on the fact that you're an ambassador from another country, or you're a foreigner that is traveling into this country to do business in Rome. And they made it very convenient to do business in Rome because Rome didn't do anything unless it meant somebody was going to make money. There had to be a value in it. What's in it for me? It was probably a phrase started by Romans. That was their plan. So, what were they doing in all these temples, which were really government buildings, government locations originally? What did they do before they even built the walls of Janus? What did they do before they built the walls of Moneta? Well, how were they doing things? How were they keeping records? They didn't need birth certificates. The records was kept in the individual hearths, in the tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. In the families themselves, you'll find carved in stone, little stone, like they'd find a piece of jasper or something, and they will carve a family name in that stone, and then they will carve another family name in the same stone. And they may carve this, it was common to carve the stone in the picture of a hand, and then they would carve these two family names in it. And it was to commemorate the fact that this family really helped this family out. And so they would have, this was called a hospitality stone. In other words, you could show that stone to that family 100 years later, and they would invite you into their house to stay, and they would feed you, and they would take care of you. They would bring you into their house. If you had that stone, you could take this and show this. They would do it with rings as well. They'd show this ring, and that because there were alliances with families based upon favors that were done a century or more before, you were going to be welcomed into that home. We don't have that concept now. I tell a story about my relatives in North Dakota from time to time. If you've heard that, I won't repeat it. But where generations later, second, third generations later, will do anything for members of my family because of something my great-grandfather did, or my grandfather did. That was commonly understood. That was a value. Doing things for other people was a value. So What's the difference between a donation and an investment? An investment usually is done to obtain a extra return. Get back your investment plus interest. A donation is actually done for the same reason, but it is operating in another realm. It's not operating in the realm of economic commerce. It's operating in the realm of spiritual commerce. So somebody, when my grandfather did what he did for the storekeepers in Grenora, North Dakota, he wasn't thinking about me. He was thinking about doing right by them. But generations later, they're thinking of doing right by me because of what he did. There's no contract involved. But this is, in essence, what investing in the kingdom of God is all about, because the kingdom of God is spiritual. But then again, the law is spiritual. It's when you try to make the law contractual that you get away from the spiritual realm, and you get into the realm of Cain, Nimrod, Pharaoh, and Caesar. Now, connect these dots if you can. We'll talk more about this from several different points of view. But if you're seeking the kingdom of God, which is spiritual, you're creating obligations in the spiritual realm. You do that with donations. And it's really hard to let go of saying, well, wait a minute, I donated this and I donated that and I want it. You guys should take care of me because I sent you $20 every month for 6 months. And now I want $600 back. Wait a minute. You want for 6 months you sent $20. So doing that math quickly, that's $120. And now you want $600 back because of your donation. I'm sorry. You're not using kingdom math very good. For one thing, you're trying to apply contractual commerce with spiritual commerce. It doesn't work that way. So we cast our bread upon the waters in hopes it comes back, but we cast it where Christ says to cast it. And Christ gave out his loaves and fishes to those who were willing to sit down in the tens, hundreds, and fifties, and thousands, and not to those who said, I don't want to sit down in the tens, hundreds, fifties, and thousands, but I want loaves and fishes now. You can't have them. I'm sorry. You're not only can't have them, we're going to tie you up and throw you out in the utter darkness, as his other parable said. We're going to lock the door against you foolish virgins who would not enter into the kingdom of God or the ways of Christ or the commands of Christ. And so you're out. Now, we've helped people out who wouldn't join, but we will not persevere with them forever. They need to repent and actually start doing what Christ commanded and start gathering. So anyway, back to this minting of silver coins. So the Romans were minting these coins back in, 290, 280, 267. There were different mints that came out because of historical events in the Roman history where they had great victories. Well, where did they get the gold to mint those coins? They came in. Now, they had leaders. And, they would go and they would fight these battles, and they would win these battles, and they would take spoils. And they had leaders that would take these spoils, and they would, obviously when they took a city or they took, they would eat of what was there, but then they would also find some gold and stuff, and they could take that back home. Well, who gets that? How do you distribute that up? How do you distribute it up fairly? Well, you coin it. You put it into coins. You melt it down, and you make coins that are all the same weight. And every soldier gets a coin. Now, that's not pay. That's the spoils. That's what we call shares. When you would sign on to a whaling ship, you would say, this is still the way it's done. if you sign on to a fishing boat up in Alaska, you're going to get shares. You're going to get shares of what the take is. They're going to catch so many cod or so many crab or whatever, and they sell it, and they make money, and you get so many shares because you're a crewman. If you're a bosun's mate, you'll get more shares. If you're a captain, you'll get more shares. And this is after the owners of the ship get their shares. But how much you take home is dependent, a lot of times, on your shares as a member of the crew. Same way with the Army. It wasn't pay, but when you got home, if it was a successful campaign, they would coin this money in commemoration of that battle, hand it out. The generals would get most, captains would get a large share, and the soldiers would get a share as well. But it wasn't a salary. It was, but how did the Army even march to go do these things? Well, somebody had to invest in this enterprise. When George Washington organized the Virginia Regiment, who bought the uniforms? Who bought the guns that the Virginia Regiment was going to use? Where'd they get the money to do that? Did Congress? Congress didn't have the money to do that. George Washington himself, with his own money, bought the uniforms and guns of the soldiers of the Virginia Regiment out of his own pocket. Other men did the same. They contributed. People would send supplies. I just told the story. During World War I, people still had this idea. And they needed mechanical ambulances. 2,000 ambulances were purchased by donations of the people, for the people, and by the people. And enough money to pay the salary for the drivers of those ambulances, of those 2,000 ambulances, was all paid for by donations, not by the government, not by taxation. People don't even have that idea anymore because your society has changed. Here we come along and we say, got to change back. Just talked to somebody who works for the government yesterday. Talked at length with him for the government of the state of Oregon. And he said that all the budgets have been cut. Fish and Wildlife, Forest Service, Federal Forest Service, State Forest Service, BLM. All their budgets are being cut all the way across the board. And this is not new. This has been going on for some time. So they don't have money to fight fires. We had these runaway fires. There were runaway fires last year, and the forests were saved, but not all the forests. Much of the federal forests were burned up. But private forests, the local sawmill, I think about 64% of the logs in the local sawmill come off of the property owned by the people who own the sawmill. Their property didn't burn up. Why? Because the loggers went out there and protected the fire lines and stopped the fire so it did not burn up the private lands. Forest Service property burned up because the Forest Service is out there protecting, and they are inadequate firefighters in many cases. I'm not going to pick on all of them because some of them work really hard, but the fact is a lot of the fires, like an old-timer one said, we used to put these fires out. Well, we actually still do, but it's on private lands that they put them out. So, but, if the private people, we just had a fire here in our community last year, and it almost burnt my son's house up, burnt up a storage shed there that they had. But, it got that close to the house, and his father-in-law's house almost went, and there were a few other structures. The only structures that actually got burned up, we saved all the houses, were storage units and a little cabin that got burned up that was right amongst the junipers. And it was an old little hauled-in cabin, so it wasn't a great loss. But what saved it was the people. The people were saving these structures. But when they went to try to fight the fire on the BLM, they were barred. They weren't let on to the property to fight the fire. They showed up with cats and equipment. they're not let onto the BLM Forest Service ground to fight the fire. So you know what they did? The citizens now have organized a private fire department, not on the tax rolls. It's already got lots of trucks and equipment, getting more equipment all the time. They start training first weekend of February, training the people themselves to be their own. We already have a volunteer fire department, but that's a structural fire department. It doesn't protect rangelands. They've started a rangeland district, and it's all volunteer, and it's all privately funded. They're not going by government. So we're actually going back towards the kingdom. We've seen this in process. Now, they're not necessarily joining congregations at His Holy Church, but, I mean, actually there will be people in congregations at His Holy Church volunteering for that fire department, that volunteer fire department. But this is the way to go back. Well, we have to go back in lots of different areas of our society. And eventually we'll have to go back in the ways of money, because the money will collapse as well. But medicines, firefighting, defense, home security, community watches, all these things. This is all kingdom stuff where we're going back, and we're now investing in our neighbors and creating those bonds. You know, we had a fire a number of years ago, then we saved all the houses. We had windows cracking in the houses and decks smoking on the houses, but the houses didn't burn because community people were stopping the fire, not other people. Community people were stopping the fire on private property. But when that was taking place, all the hatchets, all the local feuds stopped, pretty much. There was a few exchanges of words, but people settled that down pretty quick, and everybody worked together pretty well. You know, 3 months later, they were back at their feud in many cases. But the reality is there was a brief, you know, it's like those Christmas truces you saw in World War II between the Allies and the German forces. That is part of the process. So the more we do that, the more we can bury those hatchets and turn those swords into plowshares and become a fruitful nation. That's how you make America great again. It's going back to the principles of the kingdom.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
So welcome back to Key to the Kingdom. So the question was, did the emperors actually loan money into circulation? That was the original question that spawned this topic. Let's go back real quick. Rome's first minting of coins was a commemoration of winning a battle. The gold they used was usually the money that was taken in that battle. You defeated somebody, you went around and you collected all their gold and all their silver. I mean, there were actually battles with the Jutes where the Jutes actually invaded Rome, conquered Rome. They had an occupying army in Rome. They said, "We'll leave, but you got to give us the weight of our king, our ruler, our commander-in-chief," because they really didn't have a king, because they were organized also in the 10s, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. But their commander-in-chief, his weight in gold. And so they actually had him on a scale, at least the pictures draw that, where he's on one side of a scale, and then they're piling up. Everybody's got to bring gold until they got enough gold to match his weight, and then he will gather up his men and leave. So this way you don't have to go through everybody's, root cellar and, dig up their yard and try to find out where they stashed their gold. They just bring it out. We need more gold to get rid of these guys. And so, anyway, that's the way he did it. And now he had his weight in gold. Now he could take some of that gold and pay to his generals and to his men. And, of course, they were also going to be taking grain and horses and anything else of value and clothing and everything else on their carts and take their carts. And they were stripping the city. But they had to bring to the leader. And as long as they didn't bring that gold that was going to equal the weight of the leader, they were going to still be there eating and pillaging and raping and everything else. So they quickly gathered the gold and gave it to them, and the Jutes left. And so that's how they were doing it. Now, when you have to also remember, this is things that a lot of people don't. You were not likely, if you were a Roman centurion, you were less than 50% likely to ever draw your sword in battle during your entire career. You were less than 50% likely to have ever drawn your sword in battle. Yet you say, well, they're Roman centurion, they're soldiers. They were fighting all the time. Why weren't they in battle all the time? Well, they weren't fighting all the time. The Roman centurions, they didn't invade Spain to conquer it, like Germany was doing. They went up there to mine gold. And they built bridges, they built roads, they built dams, they built canals, they mined, and they did hydraulic mining and mined a whole mountain out of existence to get the gold. They had sluices that went for miles and miles and miles. And that's why they went there. And they were not drawing the sword. Now, they had a sword, but you have to remember, this is a republic. This is your local militias going up there to mine this mountain. And in order to do that, they had to have supplies. They had to have trade goods, because they're going to trade with the local inhabitants to, cut these trees and dig these trenches. And the local inhabitants are great. Yeah, we'll dig these, we'll do this stuff. And they're not forcing them at the point of the sword that they'd be spending off their time fighting. They're making trade. Well, who invested that original investment? Well, let's go back to the Temple of Janus. Temple of Janus was the temple of beginnings and ends. It was the alpha and omega of all financial ventures. Even if you were to get married, which is usually the uniting of two family wealth systems, you would go to the Temple of Janus because that was the beginning and end. But the Temple of Janus was just a space. You go in one door and out the other door. So they actually had another temple that was a part of the Temple of Janus, but not at the Temple of Janus itself. And it actually had an altar, and you would bring funds there and money, and you would invest in projects like mining in Spain. And when you came back with all the gold that you brought back, you would pay off the investors plus interest, plus other men who went on this project. They invested their time, their energy, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of time to go on this project. When they came back, they got that gold. Well, they had to have a way of dispersing those shares equally. Coinage. They coined the money again. And where they go. Now, when you're coining money, you want to make sure that the process is done correctly, that the gold is the right amount. There was electrum, which was just a combination of gold and silver, and that might vary. So you had to have people that were good at this, and that's why the Temple of Moneta was usually coining this money. And they would receive a fee for coining this money. I said we were going to talk about money changers. Money changers were experts in knowing the value of a variety of coins that were made by all kinds of different city-states and different locations and at different time periods. And so they would change your coins from this nation into coins that people would locally accept when you're purchasing. Now, beyond that, there was the trade items, and then, of course, you need to understand the golden calf and what that was all about, and how do you Rome was so self-reliant that it didn't have to do a lot of foreign trade. But it eventually it did, and so they had this other thing called bullion. So anyway, let's go back quickly to money in trade. This bullion might be huge blocks of copper that are actually sometimes even difficult to lift, or bronze, because somebody had smelted this down to a fairly pure state, and this had a value in itself because this is a working commodity. Again, remember, they were trading iron ore up in Norway, and then they would take that iron ore and turn it into tools and bring back the tools, along with other things. They might bring back other things that were unique to Norway, weavings and what have you, and then trade them down in someplace else. And they would go around to different places that would make and so this is where artisans came in, because the better you produce something, the more likely the traders would give you a better price and trade goods. So you could actually put value in a thing, in a piece of copper, in a piece of iron, in a piece of bronze, by the way in which you manufactured something of value. And so it was just like those Indians chipping flint and making, a knife or a spearhead or whatever. The better they were at this, the more artistic they were at this, the higher value it had in it. But it wasn't a value stamped on it, but it was a value stamped on it, but you could just see it. So anyway, so you had bullion, which was just the raw material, both commodity money and the artifact was a commodity money because it had a value beyond the material that made it up. And then you had coined money. Now, coin money got its special value from the fact that you might have to pay taxes, or if you came into a harbor, it might say so much gold to park your ship in this harbor. But there was a premium on gold of the realm. In other words, the coin of Caesar. So Caesar puts up money to build a harbor, to build a dock, and now you want a dock there. They're going to give you a premium if you have Roman golden coins to pay the fee for docking at that harbor. So that's going to create an extra value in the golden coin that is not actually there in gold. And so that's what coining means, is that you actually say there's value here, because in trade it is there, that actually is not there in reality. It's only there in trade. So as long as the Romans hold that harbor, it has value. So, but that idea is the beginning of token money. Token money is coins of a regular issue having a greater face value than the value their metal content contains. Now you go back to Sparta, which I mentioned. Sparta had lead coins. Well, lead didn't have much value. Lead was easy to get. You could melt it down easily. It wasn't a difficult material to get, and it didn't have a lot of really good uses. Although it did have uses. Unfortunately, people sometimes used it for plates and poisoned themselves. But anyway, that's token money, where you say it has a value that it doesn't actually have, but because you might have to pay taxes with it or a fee with it, the value is actually there. Eventually, they get to a point where they're saying it has a value it doesn't have, and they try to impose that value in commerce. But as long as you can get the minds of the people to accept the value, token money, without a doubt, they say, is the money used throughout most of the world today, is token money. Banknotes, coins, have only a tiny intrinsic value, and they are simply tokens representing pounds or dollars, which are themselves, I'm quoting here, just names in the national consciousness, the national imagination of people, mostly not even any longer tied to holdings in some national bank. So anyway, let's see if we can answer this question as to what were they doing when Caesar built a harbor, built a road, or loaned his army like Pompey did. Pompey sent his army at request of Aristobulus to Jerusalem, because Aristobulus and Hyrcanus were in a civil war. This is before Christ and before the first Caesar, because Pompey was not Caesar. And he came there, and Aristobulus sent him a bunch of gold. This wasn't a purchase. It was a donation to him personally. He sent his men personally to Aristobulus in appreciation of this gold that was sent to him. It was this, I don't know exactly what it looked like, but it was like a very artfully made bush of leaves and everything else, all made out of gold. And it was sent to him. It was very pretty and very valuable. But he sent his army. Now, he didn't just send his army for that as payment, but that encouraged him to send his army. He was invited in there, and he figures, we'll go in there and we'll open up trade. We'll build harbors. We'll build roads. We'll build trade centers. We'll make money here. But we don't have to come in and fight a war. We come in and we just help the king who's having and put down this civil war. The problem is after he got there and his generals got there, he sent his generals first, then eventually he got there, he realized that Aristobulus' claim was not the best, and he realized that Hyrcanus had a better claim, so he offered to back Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus would not accept his backing. Now his troops are already there, and it stopped the rebellion simply because of this. The troops are there, and everybody said, okay, we're not fighting. And but he felt like, well, wait a minute, this gold that you sent was not a gift, it was a bribe. And Pompey was an honorable man. That was very important. Romans, you'll hear that later in speeches by Mark Antony. But he gave that gold away. He gave that artifact away to temple to be distributed to the needy and to the poor in donations. And he wouldn't accept it. And he couldn't make a deal with Hyrcanus. But Romans were there, and so they were building harbors, they were building roads, they were builders. The centurions were builders. And they were investing in Israel, invited guests. And nobody was telling them to leave because they brought peace. They were appreciated. They weren't raping and pillaging. They were bringing law and order as the policemen of the world. So, but the fact is they're going to expect to make money back from these things, their position there, in trade and what have you, and charging fees and fines. Now, how did all this work in Rome? So his troops were loaned there. His troops were, at this time, paid. They're paid troops. They're not the local militia, because they're out being the policemen of the world, but they're paid by Pompey, fabulously wealthy man who's making money wherever he goes, destroying the pirate ships of Libya. That's what he was doing just before he went to Jerusalem. In Roman times, organizations called Societates Publicanorum were formed that offered investments referred to as partes, or what we would now call shares. These organizations, I'm reading right out of the historical accounts, these organizations offered partes to individuals to help the government with building or public structures and perform other community civic services. So if you were going to build the Temple of Moneta, you would offer Societates Publicanorum, and people could buy shares in Moneta. Moneta will mint the gold that you brought out of those mines in Spain, and that gold would be turned into coins for a price. And Moneta, Juno Moneta, would make money on this service that they're providing. So when Caesar put money into a temple, to build a temple, whether it was the Temple of Saturn to keep your birth certificates, or the Temple of Moneta to keep court records and mint coins, this was an investment. He was loaning that money into circulation. They would take that money and turn it into coins. Now, Caesar Augustus, first emperor of Rome, was also, I think he was the first emperor, I know it was around 44 BC, that they changed the law in Rome. Up till that time, because they had thrown out the Tarquinian kings, we still have this law today in America. You could not have a living person on a coin or even on a paper note. The person had to be dead. It could not be a living person on a coin. Why did we have that law in the United States? Why did they have that law in Rome for almost 500 years? And in 44 BC, they made it legal to put a living person's face on the coin. And whose living person was that? Augustus Caesar. Why? Because he was financing Moneta. He was financing these other temples that he was building. He was buying partes to the temples. He actually owned shares in the temple, including shares in the Temple of Janus. Temple of Janus, I said, had two gates. The gates were open during time of war. When there was no war, the gates were closed. Now remember, there's another temple and altar connected to the Temple of Janus somewhere else. I can't remember exactly where it was. It was near the capital. And those doors were open all the time because they were accepting investments all the time. They were paying off shares all the time. But the actual area. Now, what went on in that area? You ever go to racetracks in Great Britain? At least the way it used to be. I don't know how they do it now. And you would have bookies there. And they would be holding up fingers, and it looks like the stock exchange, where they're giving you odds on betting and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's a little bit like that area there in the middle of the Temple of Janus. And people are keeping track of investments. You want to invest in this military expedition, which might march right through those gates before it marched out of Rome, like a parade. And everybody would get all excited, and they say, oh, look at these guys in all these armors, and they're all shiny, and they're heading off to defeat the Gauls, and they're going to make a lot of money and bring back gold. I want a piece of the action. I want to buy a part of the action, and they're buying shares. Well, who has the big share? Well, of course, it's Augustus, and you're buying into those shares. And so this is how their economy was operating. So, yes, he loaned money into circulation. Yeah, he paid his soldiers. And so a lot of money came into circulation by paying his soldiers. Well, where did he get the coin? He got it from the Temple of Moneta. Well, who invested in the Temple of Moneta? The Societatis Publicanorum. Well, it was the people who built the Temple of Moneta. And they were going to make money when Moneta was making money, which is where we get the word money, is from Moneta, which was the goddess of Moneta. But when people first started studying this stuff back in the 20s and in the 1800s, they were thinking religion was what you think about God. So they were all caught up in the fact that these temples, like Juno Moneta, was where there's supposed to be two gods there. I can't even remember the other name of the other god, but it's a name like Moneta, but it's a little longer and harder to pronounce. But these two gods owned one coin. Well, how do two gods? This is where we started, so we're getting close to the end. How do two gods own one coin? They have a vested interest in that coin. It has a dual purpose. You know, the fact is, soldiers, when they're in the heat of battle, they're not thinking about the money they're coming in the heat of battle. But if there's no profit in them, a lot of them won't go to war. Early republics went to war when they were attacked. They didn't go to war to make money, and that was one of the things in Israel's republic, is that you weren't to go to wage war for spoils. And this is a tradition we see all the way back with Abraham, when he went to get his nephew back after his nephew had been captured with the fall of Sodom and Gomorrah. He was going to go defeat this army that came and took a spoil, including his nephew. And all the other people he had set up altars from, and we explained some of that recently in other broadcasts, what was actually going on with those altars. They came as allies, not because they were paid. They came because they backed Abraham. Abraham's going, we're going to back Abraham, because we see those people as a menace to us as well as other people, and because they're robbing a nearby city-state, and because I don't know what all their reasons were, but they were willing to risk their life to go and fight these guys, and out of loyalty, out of hospitality to Abraham, because of what Abraham had done for them, which has to do with golden calves and everything else, which most of you do not understand unless you've been listening regularly. Can you imagine getting this information out to everybody? But they went, Abraham said they could take a spoil, but he would not. He would not even take a buckle. He's not going to profit from war. And today, people profit from war. But Americans are losing. The people are losing because they've already lost what made their country great, which was the fact that they used to be seeking the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and now they're seeking comfort and ear-tickling pastors and ministers and their own imagination, and they have believed a lie. So, yes, the money was loaned into circulation in many ways. And yes, the money was put out there in order to get a profit back. Even the welfare was the table of a ruler. If you eat at the table of the ruler, they get to draft your sons and daughters. They get to take and take and take and take and take because you're eating at their table. And in order to make sure that you were one of those eating at their table, they made you register birth certificates registration of novation, registration of when you received your toga, or when you began to put your income on the altars of these temples. And this is what Christians wouldn't do, because they had another God. They had another king, one Jesus Christ. And they looked in another direction for their health and welfare. And it was towards the church that was tens, hundreds, and thousands. And until then, peace be upon your house, and may God be with you.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.